Delegation by Salted Pin. Starscream's battle reports leave something to be desired. Just a word of warning, this fanfiction gets a bit risque. However, that's supposed to work between robots. Shockwave knew the type only too well. Young punks who had risen through the ranks far too quickly, thanks to the ever-increasing casualties of war, and recruiting practices that Shockwave was not all sure he felt comfortable with. Not that he would ever dream of questioning Megatron, of course. In fact, Shockwave reflected, that was where the real problem lay. These upstarts would never understand the depth of loyalty and devotion he felt towards Megatron. Loyalty, devotion, and some emotion, which was weird and deeply confusing. Instead, they openly questioned orders, wondered why, yet again, they were building a super weapon out of crystals, and, worst of all, as far as Shockwave was concerned, they showed initiative. The Decepticons had not gone where they were today by asking questions, Shockwave thought. They had done it by blindly flinging themselves headlong into whatever grandiose scheme their leader could devise. And furthermore, doing it happily. Shockwave had to deal with many kinds of insubordinations in the past. Usually, he favored a simple approach. Tear out the mech in question's personality chip, file it, and forget. The large number of Decepticons who had recently gone into court-martial and simply not come out again had sent the number of formations per week of rebellious splinter groups into a sharp decline. Yes indeed, Shockwave thought he had seen it all. From mechs who ran from battle, to those who asked too many questions, to those who seemed to be under the impression that they could treat the Decepticons as their own personal cartel, Shockwave had disciplined them all. This, however, was new. This, he thought, looking down the battle report in front of him, was the first time he had ever run up against such pure, pointless malignancy. In Shockwave's opinion, any Decepticon should consider an honor, a joy even, to complete Megatron's paperwork for him. This situation had recently been necessitated by Megatron's injury in battle. Before he had offline himself for repairs, he had uploaded the details of the skirmish onto a disk for entry into the main central computer by the air commander. Shockwave was not entirely sure what happened next, as he was still following the long paper trail he was currently faced with in order to appropriately apportion blame. As much as Shockwave knew at the moment was the air commander had apparently been too busy to get the work done. This was quite reasonable with the leader incapacitated. The air commander was in charge of the Decepticon army, and had delegated it to one other member of his shrine, who had, in turn, delegated it. Whoever they had delegated to had also delegated it, and so on and so forth, until finally it ended up in the hands of someone who did seem to have rather too much free time on his hands. The mech, a seeker, currently standing before Shockwave, looked bored, and all but fidgeting. Shockwave was disgusted. He quickly scrolled through the battle report, if he could even call it that, once more, his single optic blinking indigently as he got to some of the really offensive parts, before placing it on the table before him and directing his gaze to the mech standing in front of his desk.
Well?
Shockwave said, after some pause.
Well, what?
Asked the Seeker. Shockwave bristled visibly, half in annoyance, half in anticipation. He loved his job.
Well, what have you got to say for yourself?
Shockwave asked. The Seeker actually shrugged.
I was just following orders.
If Shockwave had been holding something, he would have dropped it.
Following orders?
He shouted, standing up.
You call this disgrace just following orders?
The Seeker shrugged again.
It was like that when I got it.
He said nonchalantly, not even bothering to look at Shockwave. Shockwave could feel his core temperature rising.
That's a lie. Backtracking the traces shows the content of the disk was unaltered until your login.
Shockwave brandished the disk.
Your username is Starscream 10084432, is it not?
He asked, rhetorically.
Password.
Shockwave summoned his strength.
I like it in the aft.
In the corridor outside, Shockwave could have sworn he heard a muffled groan. He was considering investigating when the Seeker in his office suddenly kicked the desk in apparent outrage and said,
Someone must have hacked my account.
Shockwave's attention immediately flashed back to him.
You know that isn't possible. I designed the lock-in security myself.
He said, a hint of triumph entering his voice. When the Seeker remained silent, Shockwave continued,
I'm still waiting for an adequate explanation for this mess.
The Seeker's face now seemed to adopt an expression of confused innocence.
Perhaps if you refresh my memory? I don't seem to remember.
Don't remember?
Shockwave said incredulously. What fresh lunacy was this?
I write so many field reports.
The mech said.
I think this one would stand out in your memory.
Shockwave said, gratingly.
Maybe you could re-solve it out to remind me?
The Seeker gave him such a look of wide-object innocence that Shockwave momentarily doubted his conviction of his guilt. Then he gave his internal processes a shake and launched back into things.
You mean to tell me that you don't remember writing a report entitled
Shockwave collected himself.
What I Did on My Holidays by Megatron the Poopy Head?
There was another small noise from outside the door, but Shockwave was too wrapped up in things by now to notice it.
No,
Said the Seeker.
I can't say that I do.
You don't remember.
Shockwave said theatrically. Primus, he loved this part. Maybe he should have listened to his creator and gone into acting after all.
Writing an entirely pornographic account of what you claim to be Megatron's recent encounter with Seeker, whose name, coincidentally, is revealed as Starscream, in a back room of a bar on the lower decks.
The Seeker shrugged.
No,
Shockwave was momentarily at a loss. This was usually about the stage in proceedings when the wayward mech's resolve would start to waver. Fear would kick in, and they would attempt to apologize or justify their actions in some way. It never worked. Not with Shockwave, anyway, but at least they tried. After a moment or two of indecision, Shockwave rallied himself and started again.
Then let me remind you.
He said grandly, picking up the field report with a flourish. Scrolling through it, he suddenly realized what a bad idea this had been. Trying to find a single sentence in the completely fictional, he was sure, rendition of Megatron's ahem activities that wasn't literally solid was not going to be easy. Reading it, Shockwave felt outraged all over again. Simply because the honor of his commanding officer had been besmirched, you understand, and certainly not because the jagged, unnameable emotion that threatened to slice straight through his central processing unit.
Haven't I always been loyal to you, Megatron?
He thought wretchedly.
Why some anonymous seeker, and not...
Shockwave snapped back into himself, shutting down that line of thought and turning his attention to the task in front of him. There was nothing for it. He just had to read out the first bit that came to hand.
You don't remember, for example, writing the phrase, "Let me riding like a roboto possum on heat, Starscream"?
Shockwave asked, managing to get the phrase out. Starscream looked blank. Shockwave tried again.
Or the phrase, "I need your giant interface in me right now, Starscream, you gorgeous sex god"?
Outside, there was a loud metallic bang. Shockwave, annoyed at the interruption, started towards the door to find out what was going on, when Starscream suddenly dropped to his knees, a short wail escaping his lips.
alright, I confess, you got me.
He said. Shockwave bristled in triumph.
So you admit it.
He cried.
Yes, yes.
Starscream said. holding his hands out towards Shockwave in a gesture of appeal.
But please, whatever you do, don't tell Megatron. I'll do anything. Anything!
Ha 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 ha!
Went Shockwave.
Oh, don't worry. I can assure you that as soon as Megatron is back online, it will be the first thing he hears of.
Oh no!
Said Starscream, holding his hands in his face. Shockwave could have sworn that a moment before the hands went up, he had seen a smirk threatening to force its way across the Seeker's face. He paused, momentarily unsure, and wondering if perhaps there was something larger going on here that he had failed to grasp. It only lasted a minute before Starscream threw himself on the floor, prostrating himself before Shockwave. If Shockwave had a mouth, he would have let go a smirk of his own. He loved it when they did this. It was so satisfying.
No!
Starscream was babbling now, clutching Shockwave's foot.
Please, I'll never do it again. Just don't tell Megatron. He'll have my head.
Shockwave looked dispassionately down at the figure on the floor.
Very likely.
He replied, before moving his foot and shaking loose Starscream's fingers. He waited a moment, then said,
Now, get out of my sight.
Starscream peered up at him.
You mean I'm free to go?
Oh yes, I won't detain you.
Shockwave said, turning away from him. Yes, let the little creep go. Shockwave always thought it was the waiting, rather than the punishment, that was most cruel. He never told Vex the dates of their court-martial, nor usually if they would even get one. He'd simply informed them that it was known they had been insubordinate in some way. He liked watching Vex knew they'd been caught doing the wrong thing, trying to go about their daily business while all the time wondering when the cage was going to drop. Behind him, he heard Starscream get slowly to his feet and walk towards the door before pausing to say,
Hail Megatron!
Hail, Megatron.
Shockwave replied, putting real and unforced feeling into the standard salute. He heard the door close behind him, and for a moment more was troubled. The voice at the door had sounded just a little too smug for his liking. He pondered it for a moment, before deciding it must simply have been his imagination, and turning back to a large pile of insubordination reports he had for the day. In the corridor outside, Starscream closed the door, then let his shoulders sag in relief. That had gone even better than he imagined it would. Straightening up, he put his hands on his hips and directed a triumphant smirk down the corridor at Octane, who was slumped against the wall, his fist still embedded in his metallic surface after he had punched it about 3/4 of the way through Starscream's interview with Shockwave.
Well?
Starscream asked.
Well, what?
Octane asked quietly.
Did you hear it?
There was a long pause.
Yes, I heard it. I heard it all.
Starscream let out a barking laugh.
Indeed, Octane. And what did you hear?
Octane took his fist out of the wall and let out a resigned sigh.
I heard Shockwave say what you said he would say.
He replied, knowing Starscream wasn't going to be satisfied with that. And he wasn't.
Oh yes. And what was that?
Starscream asked. Octane rolled his eyes. He may as well get it over and done with.
He said, I like it in the aft.
And?
Starscream prompted. Octane sighed.
And I need your giant interface in me now, Starscream, you gorgeous sex god.
And the special bonus was?
Starscream asked.
To be fair, he didn't actually say it.
Octane argued.
He said he'd say Megatron's a poopy head, whereas he actually said,
The relevant words were all there.
Starscream said dismissively.
Now, who's paying for my engine for the next 6 megacycles?
I am.
Octane said sulkingly.
And who's covering my cleaning detail?
I am.
And who's?
Oh right,
Shouted Octane.
I know what the bet was. Just be quiet for 3 seconds at a time, would you?
They started down the corridor. silence prevailing for a moment or two.
I don't know why you had to put on all the theatrics.
Octane said eventually. Starscream made a derisive noise.
Ha! I wouldn't have had to if someone in the corridor was making so much noise and giving the game away. Anyway, he loves it. I was just helping his ridiculous ego along.
He said.
Yeah,
Octane said.
but you've basically just guaranteed he'll tell Megatron about it.
Octane knew Starscream had some strange tendencies, but before now he hadn't suspected that actually trying to bring about his own painful destruction was one of them, not for the sake of something like winning a relatively paltry bet anyway.
Oh, I certainly hope he does.
Starscream replied. In the silence that followed, Octane looked quickly at Starscream out of the corner of his optic. He could have sworn the expression on his face was almost dreamy. The end. Thank you for watching. When I was setting up my reading of A New Leader, I wasn't sure what voice to do for Shockwave. Eventually, I came up with something I was quite proud of, but I didn't really get much of a chance to use it in the reading of that fanfiction. So, I decided to read something that featured him more prominently. This has been a reading of Delegation by Salted Pin on fanfiction.net. The background music in this video is from the album Terra Navigation Protocol by Embryonic. I will provide links to both those in the description. See you next time!